Hello, welcome to another episode of the Manufacturing Leads podcast with me, Mark Bracknell, Managing Director of Theo James Recruitment. Really happy to bring this episode today. Patrick Cowan is the Operations Director of Birtley Building Products. Patrick is someone I've wanted on this podcast for quite some time. I've known of him through various people who work with him, spoke very highly of him, and he didn't disappoint at all. You're going to absolutely love this one. Patrick started his time in industry in 1995 for a company called Via Systems, thrust into the managerial world, very young age of 24, managing large teams, and has built his way up in the industry rapidly ever since. And I say he's currently Operations Director. This is a really good episode with management and leadership at its absolute core. Obviously, we talk about manufacturing, the changes over the last sort of 25, 30 years, but this is really about what makes a good leader, what makes a good manager, and what's really helped Patrick through the years. You're going to get some real key takeaway and tips from this. I've learned so much from just spending an hour with him, so I know you are too. So hope you enjoy this episode. Please feel free, please like and subscribe to the channel. This is obviously a non-profit, this is added value service. I'm really trying to push as much as I can do. So any follows and subscribes, really well appreciated. Thank you very much and enjoy. Welcome, Patrick. Thank you very much for joining me today. I appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind, just give me a quick introduction for everyone. That would be superb, please.
Absolutely, that's fine. So I'm Patrick Cowan, currently Operations Director of Birtley Group, based in the northeast of England. Been here for coming up to 2 years now. Spent the last 27 years in manufacturing in various kind of operational general management roles. Know nothing else other than manufacturing, apart from maybe delivering papers and working in Texas home care before that. So it's that's been my career to date, and good decision. Really enjoy what I do.
I'm looking forward to digging around the journey. But before that, I'm asking you the same question. What does it mean to you, would you say, to be a leader?
It's a really good question, and I think there's probably 2 or 3 key aspects to it. The most important thing for me, and it's a phrase that I took from my time working with Rolls-Royce as a customer, and that is making sure that we cast the correct and the right leadership shadow. So I think what that means is making sure that we're practicing what we preach, and one of the key elements is small disciplines repeated with consistency every day. I think that is quite important, and it allows people to understand who you are as a leader and what you're about, and engage people on a journey. And then a really, I suppose, critical part is advancing the team around you. I'm not somebody who wants to sit with people that are subservient. I want them to challenge me, and I want them to progress. And, I think that's one of the main successes that I take from the leadership role, if you like, and seeing people move on to new and better things.
Yeah, I like that. And I think what you said there actually highlights how probably leadership has almost changed over the years to some extent, where I think good leaders want to be challenged now because you're a team, aren't you? And you move on and progress together.
Yeah, of course. I think I would say it's very difficult not to operate in that way. I think I've worked in environments where you've had kind of very dictatorial bosses, etc. And at the end of the day, I sometimes feel that they never get the best out of the individuals, and it's kind of stifles and suppresses the potential of those, and essentially can create a resentment. And that for me is not what we're about. There's a common goal, there's a common journey. Let's make sure people kind of come with us on the journey.
Yeah, completely agree. So let's go right back then. So I guess pre-manufacturing. So obviously I know your first role was at Via Systems, but sort of early days, sort of when the sort of seed was sowed that you might get into this type of stuff. How did you first get into it?
Completely by accident. So I did a general engineering degree at Durham University, and the first couple of years are very common core. So you do every aspect, fluid mechanics, thermodynamics, electricals, mechanical, civil, and a brief introduction to manufacturing engineering. And then the third year, you choose to specialize in a particular discipline. And the one which I thought was the most appropriate for me, because it was practical, it was relatable, it was an element of people, process, and maths in there, was the manufacturing piece. And as part of that, you end up going and doing some work. And I think my first piece of work that I did as a secondment was with 3M in Newton Aycliffe, doing some work on their carbon the filtration systems. And that's probably when I kind of got the bug, if you like. So I was faced with a choice when I graduated. Do I follow 90% of my engineering colleagues down to London to become an investment banker or an accountant, or do I stay in the Northeast and take a plunge into the manufacturing world? And Via Systems came along, and I jumped on that bandwagon. Spent a couple of years there, and from there progressed into other areas. So it was really cutting my teeth completely by accident by picking up an engineering degree, and I think it worked well because I had no idea what I wanted to do with it at the end of it, but it kind of cemented a career, and here I am now 27 years later.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it? I know, it's funny how things are. So, because I guess people come into engineering manufacturing for different routes. Some come through the trade route, apprenticeships. Some people come through the degree route. How well do you think that served you coming through that side in comparison to, I guess, others that might be in there from a different journey?
I think it depends on the individual. I think you can enter manufacturing with a really purely academic view of the world, because it worked in a textbook. And if you do that, you run the risk of imminent failure. I think there's a balance to be had, and I think when I went into it, and even now in the job that I do, every day is a school day, so you're constantly learning. And if you approach it in that way, I think whether you've come through the traditional apprenticeship route or whether you've come through as a graduate route, it's up to you as an individual to pick, I suppose, use the skills that you've developed through a degree, or use the skills that you developed through an apprentice, and accept that you're going to have to add to that toolkit. And take the opportunities that are presented, because invariably everything that's presented you won't have covered in a textbook. So I think it's the transition's easy as long as you're prepared to embrace what it is that you're about to encounter. And I think one of the areas that reminds me of that is my first step into management when I moved across to Philips. Yeah. Completely speculative. I'd done 2.5 years at Via Systems doing manufacturing engineering, cutting my teeth in quite a fast-paced, aggressive environment. And then Philips came along, and I had the chance, put my hat in the ring. Zero management experience, none whatsoever. 24 years old, and I dropped into a shift manager role, and I was responsible for 7 team leaders working 3 shifts through the course of the week, and every team leader had 25 years experience of Philips. If you want the baptism of fire, that's it from a managerial perspective.
Sink or swim, isn't it?
It is. And I think one of the things that taught me, going back to the practical side, was play to the strengths of every single member of that team. They've got 25 years of knowledge, you've got 24 years of life. Yeah. If you're disrespectful of that, you're going to fall flat on your face.
Yeah, 100%. And that, without doubt, is a single swim moment. Obviously, for you swam, which is obviously where you are today. It's a while ago, but can you remember, mindset-wise, nerves-wise, what you were? Because sometimes when you're younger, you've almost got a different area of confidence you have when you're old in that sense. But yeah, was it petrifying, or was it just, this is me, got to do it?
You know what? If I think back, I think one of the things I've always been quite ambitious. So I thought I'm going to make a success of this without that sounding arrogant. But yeah. I had the benefit of a guy who'd been with the business for 30 years taking a punt on me. The HR director at the time, a chap called Peter Bowser, who I engaged with really, really well. And they offered me that mentoring support, but I was eased into it because I took over the shift of a guy called, and I remember his name to this day, a guy called Geordie Anderson, who'd been there for 40 years and had been the guy who would run that shift. I walked into an office where they still smoked in the office at the time, and the team leaders would come in and the team meeting would involve smoke and etc. And because you were welcomed into that arena by those guys, and I had somebody for 3 months who I could learn from. And it's interesting because when I say learn from, there was as many things I wasn't going to do as I was going to do, because I could see some of the issues that was being generated by his management style and by what he was going to do. So I was probably eased into it a little bit easier than others. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, there were some milestones in there when when you're dealing with your first disciplinary. I remember the first one that I had, which I thought was quite an interesting one, but again, it goes back to that leadership piece. Is I'm walking through a particular clean room and I look through, and it was in 1998, ironically the year of a World Cup, I believe.
France, was it? Possibly? Yeah.
It was France.
Yeah.
And if you remember the little Casio TVs that you could prop up with an aerial, one of my inspectors at the end of the line at about 8:30 at night was busy watching one of those. So I hammered on the window, got him to come round, and it literally was an instant suspension because he wasn't doing his job. And I think you certainly cut your teeth on that. But I think one of the things, the reason for me raising that was, it's not to turn a blind eye to the things that are unacceptable. And I think, going back to the nerves, maybe if I hadn't had that introduction with the team around me, I was a year into the role at that point, I think maybe I wouldn't have been as confident, shall we say.
And I think it's a really good example you've made there, because I still think that's a trap that a lot of people, and I put myself in that, fall into. I think particularly when you've got a new team, there's a balance to be had to being respected and liked, isn't there? And I think if you go too far down the line of being liked, you're going to make the wrong decision in those situations where I could turn a blind eye and almost ignore I've seen it, and I'm not gonna annoy anyone. And do you know what I mean? It's difficult, isn't it? But you obviously had that in you from the off.
I think you've just got to put a marker down in terms of saying what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. It's, you can continue to be liked and respected, and I think making people aware of your expectations, so that, that leadership shadow. If people understand what you believe is right and believe is wrong, and as long as it's not a million miles away from normality, people generally are respectful of that. And I had no issues from anybody in the team afterwards. To a person, it was the right decision. And I think it's just having the bravery to maybe follow that through, because you're right, it is easier to turn a blind eye. Turn a blind eye once, it makes it very difficult the second time round. Yeah, particularly if someone sees you turn a blind eye, and then you create a culture. That's it, isn't it? Correct. Yeah.
Do you think your style has transitioned and changed through the years, through experience, or have you stayed relatively consistent to who you were when you first started out?
I say pretty consistent, to be honest. I think it's a strange one. I think I've always had a massive respect for the people that I work with, regardless of the level that they're at and how we operate. And I think that's been the mainstay for me until somebody has until I've got reason to break that respect and trust. I think, there's probably some elements of my behavior that may have changed, but the true principles and the core principles that I stand by have been there from the outset. And I think that's probably made it easier to make the transitions through the various roles, because I'm not losing the identity of who I am. Yeah, I get that. And you mentioned yourself, but you're obviously very ambitious, and you were from the early days. Where's that come from, you think? Is that family influence, just who you are, or what do you think? Possibly. I mean, I'm the son of a miner, for goodness sake. So going down a mine was never going to happen. So, first person in the family to go to university, there's such things. Eldest grandson. I suppose just, not prepared. I wasn't prepared to accept what I'd watched my parents accept. And I'm not saying that was bad. I just had something a little bit more about me. And I was fortunate enough to have the backing of a family that, have been there at every stage and proud of the achievements that I've made. And I think that in itself kind of moves you on to the next level. So, I think, if you speak to my sister, I think she said she noticed it, that there was an ambition there from the offset. She's 10 years younger than me, and she kind of watched from a distance. And I think my dad said once, I'd kill dead things to get what I want. But I'd say that was probably a little bit far-fetched, but never mind.
But I imagine, say, son of a mine, but the hard work you would have seen at that early age, or that, it might not be it's a very different arena, but at the same time, it's hard work and tenacity, I guess, that's made you where you are today, which you'll have seen at an early age.
Oh, without a doubt. And I think it probably shaped me quite well for some of my managerial positions. I was 11 years old when the miners' strike was on in 1984, so I've seen the outcome of, some of the decisions that I now make in my job. So, it makes me it allows me to be very relatable, to understand that there's a personal circumstance. But you look at the guys, my dad worked at Easington, and hard shifts, long shifts, moved us away from collieries. That cost a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of dedication. And I suppose you're absolutely right. That commitment to family, if you like, you want to make sure that you give something back in that respect.
Yeah, 100%. In terms of, you say you've worked with a lot of good people and respect every someone you work with. Is there anyone in particular that's had a real impact, would you say, on who you are and how you manage people and how you work, I would say?
Yeah, it's a guy, it's Phillips, actually. He's the guy who took the punt on me in terms of the shift management. It's a guy called John Hurren. I ended up, he moved out to the Czech Republic and I took his job. So he got promoted and I got promoted. And I think there was a couple of things. His management style, very different to mine, very candid, probably, quite forthright, but very structured, very organized, very committed, very disciplined. Not the best people person. And I'd probably tell him that to his face if I ever saw him again. So he schooled me in lots of positives, but lots of, areas to work on. And, you watch the drive, the commitment. That was at an early age. So I'd be kind of mid-20s at that point. That was a real kind of, I suppose, not mirror, but certainly someone to watch and see how he operated and, literally see the results that he got. Because I think he's the first person at that point that said, the results are important here. Yeah. And it's something that, all of us have got in our careers that, we're judged on results. And, he kind of put that front and center.
100%. You've never been, looking at your career, you've worked with some real good companies. You've never been scared to move for the right position, and challenge yourself, I guess, which I think personally is a big skill. I think too many people probably accept what they have and don't challenge themselves. What's that like going into a new business, perhaps inheriting a new team, and I guess having to have certain strategies to change things? What's the mindset around that, we say?
I think it goes back to a question that you asked previously. Have I changed from day one? I think if you're true to yourself when you go into these positions and you've got a clear view of what you want to do, how you want to do it, and the steps that you want to take, and the people that you want to bring with you, and you make that clear at the outset. It doesn't really matter what kind of industry you're in. You're going to learn the industry, the things that you bring with you, maybe some of the softer skills. Yeah. And approaching things in a positive way, being high energy, having the courage to make some tough decisions that previous people may not have made, and that can be quite hard at times. The biggest learning point that I've made as I move through the positions is not to ponder too much. I think sometimes you can be guilty of moving into a business and allowing yourself to be sucked into the culture of how things have been done. You've got to kind of just, kind of stop that from happening, because, the speed at which some manufacturing businesses can move, you can be easily swept away. Yeah. But as long as you've got some core principles and values that you can refer back to, then I think it's quite important. And you make people around you aware of that. Then you can move through the systems, the procedures, the products, etc., at a pace that's suitable, and you're still generating the results. Yeah.
I agree. If you don't mind, I like to delve into that a little bit, because I think a lot of people could learn from exactly that. In terms, there'll be people listening who perhaps are looking at or potentially will move into a new position, and like you say, they inherit a culture, they inherit a team. They might be tasked with a strategy, but they've still got to. It's only them. They've got to do it. In terms of the actual skill, what is your plan of action, if you like, when you first start with a new business? I mean, it could be Birtley, it could be another one, but it could be hypothetical. Yeah. What are the key things you go, this is my first 12 weeks. These are one of the things I need to tackle first.
Yeah. First and foremost, who is your team? Invariably, unless the recruiting company's very clever, you don't meet your team members. You meet your boss or your peers. Yeah. So I think making sure that there's a level of engagement with your team in the first instance is absolutely critical. Not necessarily personalize it, but making sure that you know who they are, you know what they do, you understand what the challenges are. I remember a really good quote which I've used frequently, and I think I take it in every job that I go to, and every task is change isn't a criticism of the past. It just means we're going to do things differently in the future. And I think as long as you're respectful of the history and the legacy of a business, invariably you're walking into something. And, the business I'm in now has been here for nearly 60 years. The business that I was in for 7.5 years was there for equal amount of time. Something has gone right for those businesses to exist. And now you're coming in, you're the next chapter in a book. You're not here to kill the history of the business and be disrespectful of the past. And as long as you approach that and people understand that that's the case, then I think you've got to make that clear in the very first few days of being in a business. Then after that, it's one of the things I like to do is get under the bonnet of the business and understand how it works and how it ticks, and what are the key processes, what are the key deliverables, what am I going to be measured against, understanding where some of the challenges are. I think equally, you've got to, in my position, you generally got either a 3 or a 6 month probation, 3 or a 6 month notice period in the previous employment. Use that time to reach out. So essentially, when I've said yes to a job, it doesn't start the day I walk through the doors. It starts from the day that someone says, "There's the contract," and you've signed it. Ask to take on board some stuff, meet people up front, go in, see them, look at the process, go and visit the sites, understand it whilst you haven't got the pressures of delivering anything. And I've done that in the last couple of jobs. Spent a couple of days with the team, going around, give the team some expectations and deliverables before you land. So when I came here, I got everybody that worked for me to give me a very quick presentation of who they were, what the history was, what the challenges were, how they're measured, where some of their frustrations are, just so you aren't wasting that first kind of 3 to 6 months in trying to get up to speed. Use the pre-piece, if you like, the pre-engagement piece as a lever to give you a head start. And I think it also means, and it's quite important, it also gives you the opportunity to make sure that you haven't been missold by the business, and the interview veils are off at that point. So, you can have some candid conversations prior to day one if things aren't quite as you were led to believe. And to be fair, that's never been the case with me. But I've heard and seen so many people go into a business who haven't researched it particularly well, and literally 2 or 3 weeks down the line, the disillusion, it's not what it was sold. For me, that's not good for the employer, but that's lazy on behalf of the employee, not doing their due diligence and getting in there, particularly in kind of some of the more senior roles where you do have a tendency to see that happen as well.
Yeah, I think that's tremendous advice, actually, because exactly that. Too many people see it as a job they start in 6 months' time, and almost this is not a job. I've got 6 months' time to sort of break almost before I start it.
Yeah.
But to use that time, I think is a tremendous idea. It would make life a lot easier when you start. And you're right. It's a duty, particularly in the senior end, it's a duty of care for both parties, because a lot can change in 6 months. You could interview and you might have met a team of 6 or 7, and 3 of those be fantastic, and actually 2 of those might have left within that 6 month period.
Yeah.
You walk in the front door, and your first task is you've got to recruit 2 engineers. It's like, right, okay. So, and not many employees would tell you that, I think, because they'd be fearful that you're going to leave and not start with them. So, I think if you can build a relationship with the members of staff before you start, I think that's tremendous advice. I really do. Right, so that is excellent. What's your opinion on asking other key people in the business about their opinion about the team? Do you like to make your own judgment, or do you also like to take on their opinion about people?
I like to get a balanced view. I think ultimately I'll base it on my opinion and also, I suppose, facts and performance around that.
Yeah.
But I think culturally, what you find is opinion can actually go quite a long way. So if you ask a peer group in terms of an opinion of employees that are within your team, what you'll find is you get a lot of anecdotal stuff back. Mm-hmm. And, within a business, anecdotal, unfortunately, can influence how people engage and how people operate and how people perform for certain tasks, knowing that the audience has maybe got a different view of those. Yeah. So I think it gives you a great opportunity, if you take a balanced view, to then work with the people, both in terms of changing their opinion, influencing their opinion through performance, but also making others who may not be aware. Because I think one of the things that I have found is, it's great for people to have opinion about others, but they won't have the same opinion if they're sat in front of them. And I think if you can't be honest in front of an individual, whether it's a peer or whether it's somebody that you're working for, that relationship is doom and disaster. And I think it is quite important to take a balanced view and then strip away the emotion and base it on fact.
Yeah.
And I think that takes a particular skill, because emotion and opinion can sometimes overtake facts because it's more fun.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Birtley Building Products is a prime example of the good that you've done in that space of time since you've been there, because, you know, and from when we first spoke, culture was a really important part of it in that sense. Are you proud of the stuff you've already implemented, and have you seen some change because of that, would you say, so far?
Seen some change, yeah. So, you know, we've worked really hard, in particular on the supply chain piece, and you know, we've engaged with yourselves. You know, Lauren's been instrumental, and she's chasing me down again for something else to say.
That's about right, yeah.
But I think, you know, that team didn't exist prior to my arrival. That in itself, and the reason I'm using it in relation to the culture is, culture change is really difficult, really difficult. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time researching culture, and ultimately, it's a horrible thing to say, but, you know, if you really want to change a culture, you've probably got to sack 45% of your workforce, because the culture is driven by, unfortunately, past managerial traits, but also the behaviors of the individuals that believe 30 years of a certain level of performance is acceptable, and trying to break that cycle is quite difficult. So thankfully, people will be pleased to know I'm not sacking 45% of the workforce. What I'm trying to do is bring new blood, new skills, new ideas, and, you know, going back to that leadership shadow, just making sure that people can see, you know, small disciplines can create change over time. And I'm always wary of this when I see people who come in with CVs that say, I've changed the culture in a business. And the best part is they say, I've changed the culture, and they were there for 2 years. And you think, you haven't. You absolutely haven't. You might have changed a couple of people's opinions. But in Birtley Group, we're on a journey. It's going to take some time. Take some time, but I'm pleased with some of the changes that we have made. Yeah.
You remind me of a quote someone once said to me: if you can't change your people, change your people.
Yeah.
He was right, but
that's still true.
Yeah, it is. But and I found sometimes that it can be one person. You know, one person can actually affect the culture much more than you think. And when they're not there, and that works both ways. One person can come in and change the culture and bring people up with them.
I agree. Yeah, I think, and that goes back to previous questions in trying to understand your team and making sure you understand that is everyone pulling in the same direction.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you've got smoke screens and mirrors and, you know, don't look at me but look over there, then you've possibly got something you maybe want to take some time to address.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's really interesting. What do you think is one of the most challenging aspects of, I guess, any managerial job? There's some, you know, it's you go on and bang your head sometimes. What do you find the most challenging part of it, would you say?
So it's interesting, because someone that I used to work with as a customer, you know, essentially said, as managers and leaders, we're paid to manage difficult situations. So essentially, if it's all plain sailing, there's no need for us. So I think that's first and foremost probably why we're here. I think key challenges for me is the balance of getting communication right. I think that's a real challenge that many businesses get wrong, many businesses get almost right, but, you know, never perfect. Communication and making sure people are kept up to speed is one of the main challenges. I think remaining calm when things don't go to plan. Yeah, I think that is a real skill that you've got to have. And, you know, the other part has been a constant kind of motivator and creating a sense of motivation against difficult backdrops. That's the hard part, you know. So you go through a restructuring campaign, you've really got to maintain a brave face on that. You've got to, you know, you've almost got to seek the positives out of a highly negative situation. And again, as heartless as it may seem, is, you know, bring people back to the facts. It's really difficult. Managerially, you almost have to be emotionless, if you like, because at the end of the day, you know, you're there to to do a particular job. And that's not to say that you're not sensitive to people's needs, but if you allow that sensitivity to dictate your management style and otherwise, it's not a happy marriage, because ultimately you're not doing what you're paid to do. And unfortunately, we're paid to satisfy the needs of customers and stakeholders.
Yeah, I think, like you say, if you can manage by numbers, it's black and white, it's much easier. So I agree. I resonate with that massively. I feel like my job, some days I feel like my job is trying to keep people happy, trying to keep a happy house. It's one of those, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, because you can see, people walk through the door and they've got the weight of the world on their shoulders from home, etc. And it's like, how do you strip that back? Yeah. I think the ability to be able to relate to people sometimes as well, where you can personalize a particular work target, sometimes can help. And I'm not saying I'd advocate this all the time, but if you know something about the members of your team, such and such, you can use that really as a catalyst when they're looking like the forlorn because everything's gone to pot, if you like. And you say, just remember, you're going to go home at the end of the day, your kids are going to be there, keeping that motivation. Just trying to keep people grounded, I think, is the challenge. But yeah, it is like one big happy family. Yeah. Herding cats sometimes springs to mind as well.
Yeah. And from that, I think it's also looking after yourself, isn't it? It's putting your own gas mask on. I mean, how good are you at that in terms of managing you and your own mindset and all that comes from the challenges of this job?
I like to think pretty good. I think it's rare that I think I'll show much emotion at work in terms of whether things are really putting me under pressure. Yeah. The constant reminder for me, and I know I keep going back to it, is if I allow my emotions to get the better of me whilst I'm at work because of the challenges that I've got, and the challenges that I've got are shared, so I shouldn't think I'm any more special than anyone else in terms of the challenges that I've got. Mine might be slightly higher pressure, but then that's all relative. The moment my emotions break through in that respect, am I casting the right leadership shadow? I'm not saying that I should be an emotionless automaton, but I think taking some private time, close your door, have a word with yourself, look in the mirror, dust off, making sure that your public face is professional, and is people can. It's like being on an aircraft. If you see the air hostesses panic when the aircraft drops a little bit, you've probably got to start panicking as well. But if you drop a little bit and you see the air hostess continue to be calm, you don't worry. And I think it's exactly the same as leaders of a business. If we are, we remain calm because we know that it's might be a challenge for today, but it's not ultimately going to affect us. I think that's quite important. So take the time out privately if it is getting to you.
Yeah, great analogy. That the number of times we have seen been real turbulence, so you do look in the eye, don't you, and see if there's any wave in there.
Absolutely, yeah.
I love that. This is a management podcast, but it's also a manufacturing podcast. Over the years you've been in manufacturing, have you seen real change? Would you say how different is manufacturing today than it was, via systems when you first started?
Well, yeah, definitely change in terms of management style. Okay. And I think that's the biggest one that I can think of. And I won't call anyone out from via systems. It was quite a difficult environment to operate in. It was very high pressure, made a lot of money, a lot of expectations, but the management style there was very, very dictatorial. It was do as I do. I think very, very little emotional intelligence in the management team at that point in time. And it was probably right for the business because it had been, losing money. It was bought. And it was successful, and it gave me a fantastic grounding. So I wouldn't change that. And then I walked into, a number of years later into Chesapeake after Phillips, and the year I arrived was the year that the MD's chauffeur retired, and the company car that he was driven around in had gone, and the silver service canteen turned into a meeting room. So And that's it, that kind of, there was a very, in those years between 1997 and probably 2005, 95, that first 10 years, managers were almost set apart. Yeah. They were on a different level. They were, almost perceived to be something very, very different. And the level of engagement was very, very hierarchical. And what I've seen over that period of time and dealing with the business that I've been in, but also with some very big customers, is that the title starts to mean less, as opposed to the engagement and the camaraderie and making sure that you get things done. That's on the people side. Technology has moved on really, leaps and bounds. If you think in certain industries, and this is me looking from a distance, you've got Industry 4.0, which wasn't even a thing 25 years ago. Yep. If you go back, my first mobile phone was from People's Phone, and it was the size of a brick. So, the art of communication and getting, systems to do things. I think emails and, moving away from paper-based systems, massive transition in that kind of 25 years. And the irony is, you've still got people who've been through that transition and still want to hark back to 25 years ago, the piece of paper that saved the world. Yeah, and I think that gives you a nice balance just to keep your feet grounded, keep grounded. So I think there's been a lot of change, but equally a lot of migration of industries out of the UK going into other areas, which we saw. Philips, a prime example. I got out before it closed, but I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. In terms of just understanding technologies. Shut the plant down, and then a couple of years later, LG Philips as a business is no longer there because it's just not technologically aware. And I think that's one of the questions that I was expecting is the UK from a technology point of view probably could be a little bit further ahead than it is. I don't know what that looks like, but it always feels like we're on the coattails of other nations, even developing nations as they're classically kind of called, so I think
and I agree. And why would you say that is? Would you say that because of the skills, we don't have the skills here? Would you say that's more of a funding piece, government wise, or can you put your finger on why? Because I agree, I think it is behind in some areas.
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things. I think that funding definitely into universities and the ability for universities to penetrate some of the larger organizations. I think you go across to the US and where you've got MIT and some of the biggest schools over there and universities, they've probably got a bigger draw. If I go back to VIA systems, there was a Silicon Valley in the UK, and it was in Glasgow to Edinburgh, and you think, goodness me, but you never hear of that anymore. If you were to say, where's the electronics, software hub in the UK, I couldn't tell you. No. But there should be, because I know there's lots of good people out there. But then even when you hear in recent times, there's a lot of British talent, very successful in multinational companies, but not in this country. Mm-hmm. And then what you don't see is British talent in multinational companies being very successful, saying, let's go and invest in the UK. Yeah. So the question's got to be asked, why is that not happening? Why is it more attractive to go and invest somewhere else? I don't know whether that's the funding or anything else. But then taking it even further a step back, where does the likes of manufacturing, which is probably a big contributor financially, actually figure in any curriculum to say this is where we are? Yeah. This is where we are as a business, as a country rather. Let's go and invest more on apprentices, or having cleverer degree courses, or just having cleverer, more intelligent education opportunities. So I think it's probably a whole host of things. I've done some work. I mean, if I use India as an example, in previous job, we ended up subcontracting some work to India because we could get the skills in India faster. And when I say subcontracting, before everyone thinks it's at the end of a phone, we brought them across from India. Yeah. Mm-hmm. For a period of time to work with us to do some software developments. Their company was there, and the UK couldn't offer us that. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah. Crazy.
It is. And to some extent, the skills needed to fulfill what we need to be able to do in the UK is probably going to be this, and it's just going to be, for me, we're not going to because for everything you just said, and probably particularly the education piece, because there's no way those skills are being taught at all now. It's almost up to the individual to go and do that themselves later in life, and it's too late.
Yeah, and even when you've got people in, I think is into a business is the ability to sort of have a look around and get some good levels of support for the managers of the future. Yeah. I've just read an interesting article by Make UK, and that's called us out as a nation in terms of where we are in terms of investing in the leaders of the future. We're just not where we need to be. And to be fair, one of the biggest challenges I've got is seeing good 30-somethings coming through to fill some of the positions. Yeah, and that worries me.
100%. I would say the majority of conversations we have now is all around succession planning and the lack of it, and the company saying in the next 5 years they've got someone 64, 63, 65, and there's no one ready. There's no one there. It's that's a real challenge. It is. It's
crazy. And unhinging people, unhinging good people from other businesses is really tough.
Yeah.
Which is great because it means we're going after the right people, but a nightmare when you try to recruit.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I completely agree. Some quick fire questions I'd like to ask. We'll go for it. What are the 3 things which make a good leader? What do you say?
Clarity, energy, and consistency.
Nice. What's the most enjoyable part for you for being a leader? We say the one thing you enjoy the most.
Seeing other people be successful.
Yeah, like that. Last one, because the other one you've answered. If you could go back to your first day of managing someone, what advice would you give yourself now, knowing what you know?
Yeah, I'd tap them on the shoulder and say, this is a journey. This is going to be hard. Every day is going to be a school day, and be prepared for a lesson every single day. You'll never be ready. You'll always be surprised. You'll constantly be surprised. Don't worry about that. You will get a lot of things wrong, and don't worry about that. I think they're the key things if you kind of step back in time, because you think, you're given a manager's title, you've got to be everything to everyone, especially at a young age. Yeah. Don't worry about that. This is a journey. And unfortunately, the journey doesn't end until you decide to stop being a manager, because literally, no 2 days are the same, and everyone's issues are very, very different.
Well, look, this has been superb. I love these conversations because there's some real tangible things there that people can implement into their day-to-day, into their new roles, into everything they do. And, testament to the journey you've had, and testament to what you've implemented in all the business you've worked for, Patrick. So, there's a lot there for people to learn. So, look, I really appreciate it. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
No problem at all. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.